does the fossil record provide evidence of a great deluge?
Okay, let me look for a slide.
How to explain certain of those similarities which there are between certain primates and man in that non-coding DNA.
Yes.
That would be interesting.
Now, you know, I always use the example when it comes to the similarities. Life is based on similar processes, right? We all have the exact same biological composition in terms of our protein composition, our recognition glycoprotein composition, our cellular membrane composition. That means there must be huge similarity in the gene pool between various organisms. And this similarity is then used to confirm an evolutionary continuity and relationship between the various organisms. And the favorite one is always, we share 98% of the genes with a chimpanzee. Isn't that the favorite one you always hear? But they never tell you that you share 95% of the genes with a mouse, or that you share 78% of the genes with a banana. That's a good relationship, isn't it, sir? Yeah, you could be eating your relatives, your ancestors. And if you look at the question of genetic expression, take a caterpillar, it's the best example there is. A caterpillar and a butterfly. Everybody must admit they're vastly different, isn't that so? And yet the genetic composition of the caterpillar includes the entire working genome of the butterfly and vice versa. So how did that terrific diversity in the gene pool come about? It must be built in. Did it come about by evolution? Hardly likely, because the probability of just one gene with 300 nucleotides coming together is 10 to the power of 127. That's more than the particles in the entire universe. You got excited.
Yes, something really struck me at this point as you're talking about it. Some of the best ideas come to me during discussions like this. You know. It occurs to me that a good dictionary has all the good words that we use, well, essentially in the English language, regardless of what we are discussing.
Yes.
But the dictionary does not determine the subject of discussion, does it?
No.
So what if the genes are not unlike the words in the dictionary?
And
they do not determine the subject matter that is composed with them.
I like your paradigm.
You know what I'm saying? You could be doing Shakespeare, or you could be doing what's Dr. Oz, or you know, whatever. You know. Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Or you could be talking about the Bible. You know, using same words. You could be saying something profound or something deplorable. It doesn't really determine. The genes don't determine the topic.
No.
They only give you the tools to express yourself.
That's right.
Doesn't that sound like an insightful thought?
You can take it a step.
Pardon me?
That is very interesting, but I'm interested in the non-coding DNA, because it's clear, if something is expressed, it's probably very similar. But the question that I have is, because I'm discussing it with people as well, how to deal with non-coding DNA, which is very similar between certain types of primates, and they make their calculations. They say, well, as we expected, chimpanzees are most likely to us, and orangutans are further away. So we have certain patterns in the non-coding DNA, which is not responsible for gene expression, and it's more similar between chimpanzees and humans, and a bit further away you have gorillas and so on. And the question is, and the idea is that these are remnants, quite a few, about 50% of it is supposed to be remnant viruses, which in time some of them became transposons. So the question is, how do we explain that?
Actually, I think I have a solution for that, but I didn't think of it, regrettably. The solution is that a greater and greater fraction of the non-coding DNA is now recognized to, in fact, encode inhibitory RNA, which is not translated, but it serves as RNA that inhibits messenger RNA. So it has regulatory functions.
How's that? I don't know. It doesn't answer the question.
How do you know?
It doesn't answer the question in regards to the similarities.
If you look at DNA, let's say transposons. If you translocate the transposon to its new position, the consequences will be totally different, right? But that transposon has always been part of the original genome. In other words, it's part of who and what you are. The fact that it can transpose has nothing to do with evolution, because if the locus to which it transposes is just one nucleotide out, the rest would be gibberish, right? Because you're working on a triplet code. So it has to be an exact process. So even a thing like a transposon or heterochromatin or non-coding chromatin, all of these genes must have a particular function, even if we don't understand it. Now, in the beginning, when we started arguing about transposons, this was the great new thing to favor evolution and to bring about rapid change. But the fact of the matter is, if the process of the transposon isn't absolutely precise, in other words, it has an element of design in it, if there's just one fraction deviation from the precision, you've got gibberish. It still smacks of design.
By evolutionists as a point in favor of what? The idea is, in times of crisis, might it be a temperature change, lack of food, all of a sudden there is much more activity of transposons,
Yes.
and all of a sudden you might have also more mutations, and some of them might be beneficial for the next generation, and so you might have a shift, a DNA shift towards a certain direction in the next generation, which will be more better applied to their environment.
Is that evolution or is that design? Because take Spalix. It's the most famous example of what you're talking about. Naked mole rats. In naked mole rats, there is a matriarch. She's the only one who reproduces, right? All the offspring. If the environmental conditions become hazardous, then all of a sudden there is a total rearrangement of the genome, and you have a massive diversity in the offspring, which in all other cases doesn't exist at all. There's hardly any diversity. Now, again, is that evolution, as you say, or is that built-in genetic variability and built-in mechanism to produce the variety to deal with the consequences of a changed environment? Didn't God use genetic engineering in the beginning? Did he use it, yes or no? Yes. On your belly you shall crawl. Thorns and thistles it will produce.
But Darwin didn't write a book about the adaptation of species. He wrote a book about the origin of the species.
That's right.
So, this business of using adaptation and extrapolating it to imply origins is a very bad line of argument.
Well, I understand them, because when I discuss it with them, and we can only go so far, but we cannot go really back to the very beginning. You cannot really go to the laboratory, but we can observe as changes in what we call microevolution, or even...
It's not microevolution.
But we can see as small changes over time. Let's see, for example, grains. They are mice over time, very small, and it has, humans bred it in a certain way. Now we have these nice big corns, or we have wheat, which is very nice, but over time it developed through our intervention into a specific product.
Personally, I don't believe in microevolution. I'm probably one of the few creationists who doesn't believe in microevolution. There's no such thing as microevolution. It's adaptation. It's adaptive change. But it always has to be built into the genetic system. It's not an evolution. It's a differential activation of gene patterns. And it has nothing to do with evolution. I think it's a very poor choice of word.
It's like antibody development against novel antigens or foreign problems that happen to hit our bodies. We can elaborate new antibodies until we find one that works. And then we select that one to store in memory cells, which will serve us in the future encounter of the same problem. But the whole mechanism of developing such antibodies is always there.
Was the capacity to get the varieties of all the fruits that we have there from the beginning, or did it come about by evolution? You can only draw out of the wild type what is potentially there. And you can draw it down through selective breeding to the smallest or to the largest, whatever, the sweetest or the bitterest, the sourest or the whatever. But it always had to be there. It's not an evolutionary process. And the changes that we see in bacteria and in wheat are as a consequence of transposons, but that is already existing bacteria that is compatibly spliced into a recipient. So again, it was already there. There's never any evolution. It's only rejuggling of what is already in existence.
I think I have a interesting way of thinking about that question, why the similarity? And it's just the simplistic way that I think about it for myself. And that's that when people talk about the similarities between us and a chimpanzee, for example, it doesn't really tell us anything, because we already know that chimpanzees look similar to us. Their eyes are in approximately the same place as ours are, their noses, their ears. They look, 98% like us. So the fact that the DNA there is just kind of it's a no duh. I mean, we look like chimpanzees, they look like us.
Why is
so
the gibbon,
there's no...
You're right. Why is the gibbon considered more primitive
right.
than
Who made that
the
decision?
chimpanzee? Just because he doesn't have the flat face, right? And his eyes are more on the side. What is the selective advantage, according to science, that the eyes move to the front, better triangulation? But these other organisms jump just as well without the triangulation. So there's no selective advantage. Have you ever seen a squirrel miss a branch? It doesn't, right? So it comes from the eye of the beholder. It's your paradigm that determines what is close.
I don't think you need a complicated discussion as to why the DNA similarity. It's just we look things that look similarly have similar DNA.
A classic example is when you look at the mammals. The rhinoceros is always classified as primitive. On what basis? On the basis of its paleontological position in the paleontological record? No, because it's way there on top with everything else. On what basis is it primitive? Purely on appearance. Nothing else, purely appearance. Which shows that the mindset of the scientist determines whatever the paradigm is he wants to project.
There are species of dinosaurs, for example. There are species of dinosaurs, for example, like Triceratops. If you look in the evolutionary paradigm, they have another species which they've named Protoceratops.
Yes.
Completely arbitrarily. I mean, it looks like a Triceratops. It's just maybe a little fatter here, and it has a little shorter horn up front here, and they've decided that it's a more primitive version, just because that's what their paradigm says.
Or Ardi. You know Ardi? The latest Australopithecine that has been found, who now proves that we've come from the trees because he has a slightly longer digit length. I could take anyone in this audience and we could compare digit lengths, and I'm pretty sure we'll all differ.
Some of us are from trees.
Exactly.
But primitivity doesn't make much sense because they can be as primitive as they want to be, but they are very well adapted to live.
Exactly. I'll give you a marvelous piece of evidence to shoot me down in the future. Lucy is classified as an intermediary on the basis of the ratio of arm to leg length. Apes have a ratio of 1:1. The arm is as long as the leg. Man has a ratio of 0.75:1. The arm is only 75% of the leg length. Lucy, although there are half the pieces missing, falls between the two, and I think it's 1 to 0.87 or something, judged on what they see from the fragments, which nobody can calculate. So on that basis alone, she's an intermediary. Now, I've got news for you. Look at the length of my arms. They're exactly the same length as my legs. So you've got a monkey speaking to you.